Welcome to Recalculating Small Business. Like its award-winning book, Recalculating is dedicated to small business in America. Your hosts are Don Mazzella and Dan Perkins. Don Mazzella is the editor-in-chief of the Small Business Digest. Dan Perkins is a registered investment advisor with 43 years' experience in managing money.
Dan, our next guest is Jonathan Ende, who is CEO of SeamlessDocs, a technology company that brings digital solutions to hundreds of government agencies around the nation. And he's here to talk about what small businesses need to know about obtaining government contracts. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, we invited you on the program, A, because SeamlessDocs is such a great product, but also because you've been very successful as a small business and now a larger business and getting government contracts. And we often get in our emails people asking, but how do we get on government buying lists, etc. But we want to go into that. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your company first.
Sure. Again, honored to be on the show, so thank you guys for having me. Again, my name is Jonathan Ende. I'm CEO of a company called SeamlessDocs. SeamlessDocs, we're a venture-backed cloud startup where we exclusively work with local and state governments to help them take all of their existing PDF and form processes and turn them into beautiful online experiences. So that involves everything from taking that PDF when you normally navigate to a government website and have to download it. Maybe there's an envelope and a stamp involved. We essentially take that same PDF, allow them to upload it, and turn it into a smart online version. So now not only can it be filled out online, but you have attachments, you have payments potentially with calculations, you have an e-signature with a legally binding e-signature. And then when you click submit, we build a database of information collected so that both the end user or the citizen or the constituent can follow up and see what's going on with the status of that form. And then at the same time, we actually give tools to the government employees for them to be able to process and collaborate on that submission as well.
Well, lately I've unfortunately had to deal with the state governments and the federal government, and I've been surprised how in some cases it's been very easy to get things done, and in other cases it's been very difficult. I'm going to ask one question and then turn it over to Dan. What is it that you do and that makes it easier for a state government or even a municipality to accept the ordinary transactions between the citizens and the government?
Yeah, so believe it or not, it's actually pretty complicated, or more complicated than we'd think just as citizens on what's involved with collecting government data. And as you had mentioned, you're absolutely correct. Some interactions with government, like, for example, paying taxes, normally are pretty automated at this point, maybe even easy to do, normally having some online component, maybe even some automated component. But a vast majority of government interactions still involve a PDF form, maybe even, again, some version of a check or a stamp. And a large reason for that is that while there have been solutions that have been built for the kind of the few use cases and maybe the large use cases, an average government still has hundreds of PDF forms, right? So how do they ever go and convert that existing PDF into an online version? And that was a huge thing that we really contemplated, because a lot of the solutions out there require them to change their existing process. And whether you're selling to a government or whether you're selling to any organization, changing anyone's existing process is a really hard thing to do. Right? It involves change management. It involves just work on your side to be able to change the way someone's used to doing something. So that was one of the huge lessons that we learned early on with SeamlessDocs, was understanding how they work now. And what our solution would enable them to do, it's a very simple do-it-yourself platform. It's similar to a Google Docs or maybe a Microsoft Word-esque interface, where they simply upload the PDF and they have drag-and-drop tools for them to be able to turn and make that process fillable and smart. And we have power tools to make it, even do things like conditionals, like only ask these questions to Don if he is married, but if he's not married, don't ask these questions, for example. So we're able to make that really easy to use. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what's so great is that now they can still have that PDF on their website, but now when you click on it, it's an online version. You can control who sees it and how they see it. You can give them analytics. Because we are exclusive to work with governments, we also understand compliance. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things to think about. Is this ADA compliant? Is this someone with vision disability? Can you increase the font? Is it 508 compliant? Can you actually have a screen reader read this form still as well? There's a lot of other things. How are you collecting that data from a security perspective? Is it encrypted at rest? These are all things that we do out of the box. So ultimately what we're able to do is, again, not just take that PDF and turn it into an online form, but turn it into a government online form. And because we made it so easy to do, and because we're replacing an existing technology, which is just that PDF that involves so many steps, we can in many times take 14, 15, 20 different steps, right? Printing, signing manually, getting a check, cashing check, processing it, and we can turn that all into one seamless online step. So ultimately, because we've been able to do that, we've had some great success in selling to government. And as you mentioned, we work with hundreds of governments ranging from cities and states of all sizes.
Well, Jonathan, I'd like to go back to our original purpose. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would recommend to a small business thinking of trying to enter the government marketplace, either local, state, or federal?
So from a procurement perspective, in terms of what is the best way to interact with government, is that the question?
Yes. What advice? You've got so much experience selling to governments. How can you help our small business audience understand what they should be doing if they want to get a piece of that government sales pie?
That's a great question, and something that at this point I must want to say we're a little bit of an expert on in terms of how to sell SaaS to local government. I think for the past 3 years we've been exclusively selling to just government. I have a saying that when I first started selling to government, it was just called selling to government. Now there's been a lot of progress within the space. Now the space is affectionately known as GovTech. So within the GovTech space, there are a lot of things to consider if you really want to sell to the local government. First and foremost, the reason is why. Is it just another market that you think? Is it actually an initiative that you have? Are you trying to expand an existing business, or are you trying to actually sell a specific solution just to a government? So I think that's the first step to start. So sometimes you have a company like a Box.com that traditionally is a private sector sales process, but they want to say, we think this market's interesting, so we want to go sell to government. Or you find like other smaller startups that are saying, hey, I have a really cool idea to help government innovate in this particular sector, so I'm going to go sell just to government. So depending on which of those answers, but regardless of which you choose, the next step is really understanding government and how they work. So, for example, you have to figure out, well, the solution that you're trying to sell, whether it's existing or new, what are some of the nuance that the governments have that you need to factor before selling? It's always, I feel like that almost seems obvious, yet you'd be amazed how many people I talk to, and they start telling me about their solution. I'm like, well, you want to sell to police departments, so have you looked into CJIS compliance? And they're like, well, what's CJIS compliance? Or I'm like, oh, well, you want to sell this online tool, but like, how are you guys doing your 508 compliance check? And they're like, what's 508 compliance? So there are a lot of little nuance. It's not, you have to keep in mind that selling to government, one of the things that we say here at SeamlessDocs is you need to have respect for government in order to sell to government. And what I mean by that is you can't just go and walk into a government and expect them to operate the same as a private sector. They don't. There's a lot of similarities to the enterprise, but understanding what their process is first and foremost and what maybe precursors you need. Now, with that being said, I think what's so amazing about government is that all of these things are public, where if I wanted to go sell to like Google or sell to Nike solution, they're probably a little more cryptic about what you need to do to be approved to sell to one of these large enterprises. Whereas government, it's actually public. It's an open book. Yet many times people don't take time to actually look into what's required in order to sell to them. And believe it or not, you can actually call and ask. It's an incredible amount of the things we've learned just by asking. So if you're a small business or a large business trying to sell to government, call them and be like, hey, we're thinking about selling this solution to your government. What are the things, the precursors that we need to know? They might say, well, you need to be registered in the state of Nevada or the state of X. You need to be a local business. You need to have a brick and mortar. You need to have a fair wage claim. You can't have people, offshore that you're using, for example. And these are all questions you can ask. So after doing your simple diligence in terms of understanding what a government actually needs on the checkbox or the checklist for you to approve, then from their part, it's understanding how do they buy. So to walk that through, it's first assessing why do you want to sell to government. Then it's what do you need to sell to government. And then the third one is how to sell to government. How to sell to government, that's understanding procurement. Again, same thing when so many times people say, oh, I want to sell to government, but they're so hard to sell to. Again, that's actually not necessarily true. Governments have a lot of procurement processes in place that are actually put in place to protect us taxpayers. They don't want, any corruption happening. They want to make sure that it's a fair buying process. You have to actually respect that process, as we do here at SeamlessDocs. We respect the fact that sometimes they need to go out to a competitive bid because they want to make sure the taxpayers are getting the best deal possible and that they've done their diligence appropriately before they spend that money on that new solution. So then it's really just understanding the various how they buy. So do they have to go through RFP? Do they have certain thresholds they can buy under? What is the procurement vehicle? Are there any particular requirements? Are there benefits for people of, women or minority owned, or are there different things that you might qualify depending on where you're selling to and how you're selling to? How do you take advantage of those credits? So understanding the third piece, which is the how. And then after that, the last piece we like to say is, understanding, what it takes to support a government. And that's also, and so once you actually sell to them, at least our vision here at SeamlessDocs is we want to be an extension of their team. We don't want to just be another form builder for them. We want to provide a team that actually empowers them and actually makes them better, the same way that they make us better by teaching us more about their processes. And that's the last piece in place. With government, yes, you can potentially just give them an out-of-the-box solution, but here at SeamlessDocs, we think a lot about how do we price not just for the sale, how do we price for success? How do we make sure that we can also support them? We can provide a phone number they can call anytime. We can provide learning materials so that we can actually understand how they work. And because remember, also within government, it's not just about selling an individual one-off solution. It's about change management. How do you give them tools to get buy-in? If you're not just selling to an IT manager, there's so much involved after. And that's something here at SeamlessDocs we've become obsessed with, is understanding how governments work so we can better work with them.
That is absolutely fascinating. I don't know what else to say. It's just fascinating the way you put it and so clear. I have one more question, and I'll turn it back to Dan for one question. Do you find that government workers are willing to listen to your spiel and to not be worried about their jobs?
So the quick answer is yes. There's an interesting quote. It was the CIO of Oakland, I believe, Oakland, California, where she said, I love innovation, but I hate getting sold. Right? And it was such an interesting way to think about what this balance and this irony, essentially, where governments, they want, they desire, they need new innovation and new tools, yet they don't like getting sold something. And I found that so interesting. So my rebuttal was, well, how do you find out about innovation if you're not open to the sales process? And I think in general, governments, they want this innovation, and they are open to it. I mean, I think my greatest inspiration is the people we work with every day, both on my team, just really pushing the limits in terms of what's possible, but more specifically, the governments themselves. I think people don't respect how hard it is as a government employee to buy something. The hurdles, you have to become a champion. You have to go and essentially, it's not just me selling a government and a CIO on a solution. They need to actually go and they need to go sell out to council. They need to go sell out to their team. It's actually a lot more work. So, for someone to actually go and be willing to step up to the plate and go and do something because it's hard and not because it's easy, I think that's so inspiring from a government perspective. And I think that, we're so lucky every day to get to work with these government employees that are willing to go over and above because they know this is the future. They know this is right. I say all the time, when you think of the future of government, it most certainly will not involve a fax machine and a pen and a stamp, right? So how will they ever get there? And we'll get there, yes, by solutions like SeamlessDocs, hopefully, but you're not going to get there without those government employees pushing the limits. And every day I'm inspired to find more and more of those coming up. And another interesting stat is I think it's something like 60% of government IT employees will be retired in the next 10 years. So there's a kind of changing of the guard as well, where you have these solutions. And by the way, the existing guard that's in SeamlessDocs now, they're ready. They're seeing it. Governments are late movers because they need to be, right? They need to make sure they don't just jump on the newest trend without actually vetting it. So there are these things they have to consider, and we're really excited to be working with these government innovators as they are pushing the limits in terms of change. And you're seeing it slowly but surely, but it's definitely coming. And I see another rapid innovation happening over the next 5 years in government, where I believe there's a government where it can be entirely digital. And I think although it's not easy, hopefully companies like SeamlessDocs and others in the space are really helping to work with government to make that happen. And I'll repeat that one more time. We cannot do it without government. It's this private-public partnership. We are not doing it by just building great technology for government. We're building great technology with government, and we're partnering with them to be successful. So that's what it's going to take in order for government to change, and we're really excited about being part of that change.
Dan, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm fascinated about what it is you do, and I need to clarify in my own mind. Are the processes the same regardless of one, either you are a taxpayer trying to interface with the government, and two, if you're a businessman trying to acquire business from the government?
So, from a procurement perspective, is your question?
No, what I'm trying to understand is what you do, working with taxpayers and how they interface with the state, federal, or local government, or are you providing services to small business people to help them become more efficient and more productive in dealing with government agencies?
Oh, I get it. So it's a wonderful question. So what we do is we actually sell to the government. Our vision is that we don't want to have to individually work with every citizen on having them decipher how to work with government. That's actually how I got into this business. I used to have a very large paralegal outsourcing company where attorneys would outsource the paperwork to me for people trying to decipher how to fill out government forms. Right? That's actually the case with TurboTax. TurboTax is a $1 billion company that is built on helping people decipher how to fill out government forms. I don't think that should be the case. Right? Ultimately, what our goal is that how do we work with the governments themselves to empower them, but how do we actually enable them to provide that same experience that TurboTax can, right? But provide that for their constituents. And keep in mind, this isn't just citizens. Almost half our forms are internal forms. Governments have an incredible amount of internal forms as well. As we like to say, whereas in the real world, money is our currency, in government, information is. Right? So how do they collect that information? Almost every single interaction with government involves a form. So how do we empower them to be able to provide those same online experiences? So to answer your question, we actually sell to the governments, and we provide them with ways where they can better collect information, both from their citizens, their staff, and their vendors.
So if I understood what you said, you're saying that your business is working with the government agencies, departments, or whatever, and making them more productive and more efficient when they're working with vendors. Is that correct? Enable them to become more efficient working with any time they're collecting information. So that could be collecting from you when you want to register your dog as a citizen. Okay.
It might be an internal personnel form for a government where an employee gets actually promoted, or it might be a vendor, having a vendor even register. So across the board, anytime you're interacting with that government where there's a PDF form or any sort of data that's being collected, we enable them. And a really interesting thing that we do also is because we work with hundreds of governments, there's a lot of economies in scale in terms of the things that we're doing. So as I like to say, governments are constantly solving universal problems individually. Well, at SeamlessDocs, because we can go and we work with hundreds of governments, when Newark, New Jersey signs up, they might be able to learn or take advantage of a feature that we just built with the city of Charlotte, for example. But when Cresco, New Jersey, now a small city, when they sign up, they have all these features and tools that they maybe otherwise couldn't if they were trying to build it themselves from scratch. So we get to take advantage of all these different features we're working with and all of the customers to provide better services to everyone.
Do you have government agencies now that you're working with, or government agencies that you're trying to work with, who have concerns about cybersecurity?
Absolutely, that's a huge thing that we focus on here at SeamlessDocs, right? Where, as I mentioned before, you have compliance like 508 and ADA, but from a security perspective. And really the point here is that now leveraging modern technology and with government becoming more and more comfortable and even running towards the cloud, what SeamlessDocs does is we enable them a venue now where they get to take advantage of that. Whereas, again, a small city like Cresco, New Jersey probably doesn't have a full-time security administrator that knows how to configure AWS or Amazon Web Services to the most secure, recent way to handle it, or is working on putting patches systematically. I mean, that's ultimately what happens with government all the time. Even though there's all these strict security standards the government needs to abide by, as we like to say, a lot of times in government, your security is only as strong as your last time you were audited. And then, the next day, who knows what happens or who knows if something else new has come out. Because we're constantly monitoring that, we basically give them security out of the box for a lot of their data collection. We have a full team of security experts that we're working with. And on top of that, on our team, and then our CTO was at Google for 10 years before coming on board to SeamlessDocs. So we get this power of being able to provide them modern technology and security out of the box. So a lot of times, actually, a large reason they're coming to SeamlessDocs is for additional security and also for additional compliance as well.
So your company actually could do, I don't know, do is the right word, provide probably is a better word. You could provide better security for a small city or county or municipality than that they could afford to buy on their own.
Yes, when it comes to collecting their forms and data. We're not a government security company, but yes, when it comes to collecting data online, we can, in most instances, provide them a much more secure and compliant way to collect their data.
Is there this might be a little bit of a difficult question. There's a huge controversy going on right now in Washington, D.C., in that the Department of Defense is considering transferring all of its files to the cloud run by Amazon. And there are people who are saying that's too much concentration. If something would happen to the cloud, we could be in serious trouble. So how important is it for a businessman to make sure that they've got diversification in their cloud resources?
Yeah, so, in terms of that, I'm actually familiar with that particular project. In that particular instance, it's actually a joint venture, in my understanding, between Amazon and the federal government. So in that instance, ultimately, again, if you think about the systems that are enabled by the cloud, when you think about, apocalyptic scenarios where, what if the whole cloud, what if Amazon goes out of business tomorrow, or if Amazon, a data server blows up? The reality is, from a technology perspective, the cloud enables so much more than you could ever with a paper filing cabinet, for example. And I think also the thing with government, it's not just, you need, I think it's undeniable you need a digital version of all this data, because if you don't have a digital version of this, then you don't have access to it. And if you don't have access to it, you can't use it to how it should be used, for good. There are actually these caves, I believe, outside of Pennsylvania, that are just filing cabinets of data, right? Sure, I guess you could argue that would be harder to get rid of, but I guess until a fire starts there or something, right? I think the reality is with the cloud, there's always a apocalyptic scenario where a data center could blow up, but so can filing cabinets. But when it comes to Amazon enables you where I can actually store the data in California, but at the same time it's self-replicated in real time in New York as well, and also potentially, and I can control where this data is being stored. So And you also, even if you really wanted to, you could actually, it's really easy now with the cloud with like we use a technology called Kubernetes or Docker, where you can actually create really, like you can kind of spin up new servers that are essentially cloud agnostic. You can run it on AWS, you can run it on Azure, or you can run it on Google, for example. But again, I think it'd be hard to argue that Google and Amazon are going anywhere, and I'd be more worried about a warehouse with just filing cabinets, catching on fire than Google losing data.
So are the communities that you're working with that are switching over to your online technology, what are they doing with the file cabinets? Are they scanning them and putting them on your server and getting rid of the file cabinets, or what are they doing?
Yeah, well, there's a wonderful story where the GSA actually just opened up really beautiful offices in One World Trade Center. And when they initially had the plans, they had tons of filing cabinets. And when they finally moved in, luckily they had a data transformation project where a lot of that data no longer needed to be in filing cabinets. And they actually turned those filing cabinets into lockers. So now instead of having locked filing cabinets, employees can actually use them to store their backpacks or briefcases or what have you. I thought that was a great use case for filing cabinets in a modern age. Ultimately the answer is, we're in the business of helping governments plan for the future. So, if they still have that data in filing cabinets, yes, we're always encouraging our governments to scan those documents and put it into SeamlessDocs as a system of record. So now they have access to it. But ultimately, again, we're really, I think what's so great about our solution, as we mentioned in our intro, was if nothing else, the goal is to start getting this data online in a structured way, start being thoughtful about it like today. And that's actually a very easy and quick project. I can go and talk to a government this morning and and within 20 minutes I could take a PDF or any form, bring it online, and allow them to start collecting that data in a structured way. And the sooner they start, the sooner they're kind of be on their way to a future where they can leverage all the benefits that come from the cloud and digitization. And then when it comes to their filing cabinets, yes, we're happy to provide plans for how they can think about those or what's moving forward. But first and foremost, the time is to start getting all this data so it can be collected online. And also, let's not forget the cost savings that happens. On average, we save $42 per submission. Think about that, $42. We always joke around. A lot of times we'll do animal registrations, and we'll see that they're charging $16 for an animal to register, but actually when they actually do the calculations of how many hours it takes to process that form, it's costing them $42, right? So they're actually losing money. And by the way, that's not the outlier. That's the norm. Collecting paper forms is incredibly expensive. We had a large city in California that actually stopped accepting paper forms. They only accept online forms now because it was just too costly. They literally would have 2 full-time people doing data entry where it doesn't need to be like that anymore. They put them in iPads in their lobby, and they spun up a Seamless form, and they were able to collect that data and in real time avoid taking an hour. And then don't forget data inconsistency where they had spelling mistakes or data was transcribed improperly. And then on top of that, all of our forms are smart forms. So, how many times have you filled out a government form and you filled it out incorrectly, or you missed a field, or you were unsure on what this question actually was asking? All of that now with tip bubbles and real-time validation and third-party server checks, even where we can, query a third-party server in real time to validate data, adding calculations. No more add A plus B plus D. Why can't we just do this for you automatically in this modern age? So there's so much other benefits that we get by just taking that PDF and bringing it online.
Are there implications of what you do for the private sector, just within the private sector, not dealing with governments, but just in the private sector?
Absolutely. I mean, I think from a private sector perspective, we want to make it easier for them to interact with their governments and understand. Yet, from a technology perspective, yes. I mean, we get inquiries every day from insurance companies, from banks, from all different types, trying to ultimately we're a paperwork automation platform, and they're always. But our commitment is 100% to government. We say no to them all. It's about focus. Right? Our focus is exclusive to government. We just launched a huge new upgrade to the platform. And why? Because It was a feature that our governments were asking for. Governments have some unique needs, and so we're really excited just to be, catering just to them. Governments have seldom get a solution that's built just for them. A lot of times they're kind of saying, hey, this is a tool built for the private sector, but why don't you guys try to use it? By us working exclusively with government, we believe that puts in a unique perspective to really provide a tool that's not just built for government, but it's built with government. And from a user experience perspective, that we have already seen has incredible benefits to our end users, where their engagement is and how we can solve problems for them.
What do you see right now in growing your business? What is the biggest obstacle that you have to overcome in the next 1 to 3 years?
So funny. I mean, one of the problems that we have at SeamlessDocs is we have too much product market fit, I like to say. There's so many different solutions that our governments are asking us to continue to help them work on. So, for example, Charlotte might want us to really build out better, features for procurement tools. Yet, New York City wants us to build tools to help them, with permissions access, and then meanwhile, so it's just the biggest hurdle we have to understand is how do we make sure that we're building appropriately features and prioritizing them in the best way that helps the majority of our customers. So we don't build custom software here at SeamlessDocs. Everything we build, the entire platform gets the advantage of. So I think that's actually one of the challenges we have in the years to come. There's just so much opportunity in terms of how we can add new features to our platform that will allow us to accommodate more use cases. So we're constantly kind of thinking about that, and we're really excited about what that is. Yet at the same time, we do want to make sure that we're doing that responsibly and we're not going too fast, and we're building every solution we build is done elegantly and in a beautiful manner.
Thank you so much. Don, back to you.
We've been talking with Jonathan Ende, who is CEO of SeamlessDocs. A link to his website will be on recalculating.biz tonight. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a great talk, and always interested in having any conversation that involves government innovation. So thanks for having me.
Well, sometimes people say government is the obstacle to innovation, but if we heard you correctly today, you're saying that government seems to be enabling you to provide some innovative solutions to the interaction between citizen and government.
Absolutely. And I think that the reality is if people just took the time to work with government and not just try to expect them to operate the same as everything else, then I think that people would be amazed at how incredible government can be as an impetus for change and innovation.
Well, I want to use my favorite line that Harry Truman used. He said he thought the president was a servant of the people, and when he left the White House, he thought he got promoted. And I always say that because he really believed it, and some government workers really do believe in that. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, and we couldn't agree more. We have a saying at SeamlessDocs that government is beautiful. That's our tagline, and even more importantly, our other saying is service is beautiful. And as I mentioned on the podcast, I think people forget sometimes how hard it is to be a public servant, and these people are absolutely just that. They're servants for change, and they are, for them to go over the top and show initiative on helping push the limit in terms of what government can achieve. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see how, when technology and government collide, what will be created.
Well, we have been listening to Jonathan Ende of SeamlessDocs. This program and every other program is available on recalculating.biz. Thank you so much.
Dan Perkins here from recalculating.biz. I want to tell you about Bob Bethel. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. Dan Perkins with your featured book.
Dan, Troy Dye, Chief Marketing Officer for Capital One Small Business Card Division, is here to talk about a survey and data that they have identified about how small businesses view the economy in the second in the second year of President Trump's term. Troy, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
First, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and what your efforts have recently uncovered.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I am with Capital One. I've been with the company for about 19 years in various different roles across kind of our operational units and our business units. I've actually worked with small business owners in two different stints, one for about 5 years prior to the recession, and then for about the last 6 years. And then just my personal roots in business go way back. My father actually taught a series of small business courses at community college for about 30 years in Tidewater, Virginia. I was running the old burger joint simulations when I was a teenager supporting his class. So I spent a lot of time around this community, and they're near and dear to my heart. Capital One more broadly has also been serving small business owners for about 20 years now. And we offer a variety of products across credit cards, banking products, and retirement accounts.
Wow. Okay. I know this is dear to Dan's heart because we started this program because we thought that small businesses would really prosper under the Trump administration. But what does your survey show?
So we haven't asked many questions that are specific to this administration. I think some of our questions are a little bit closer to policies around that. What we've seen over time, and if you look over the last 5 years or so, is that optimism continues to be at all-time highs. I think that's been confirmed by a number of different survey vehicles that are out there. We do still see a little bit of a gap between what business owners say their optimism is and what their beliefs around forward-looking sales are. And I think that's something that we've seen pretty consistently. So optimism is up, 10 or 15 points on our survey. Sales is probably only up 3 or 4 points. And so we continue to see just a level of inherent conservatism in our survey. But I think, one of the great things about this tool, and by the way, it's called the Capital One Small Business Growth Index, is we have two sets of questions within the survey tool. One are some kind of baseline longitudinal questions that we ask consistently over time. Another set is a very topical set. And so this go around for the first half of 2018, what we looked at was tax reform, technology, and diversity. And I think to your question, tax reform might be the one to start at, where we see, a generally neutral to positive reaction to what the new tax plan will do to the economy, and a slightly more muted reaction to what business owners will think they'll pay themselves in taxes. So just to give you a little bit of a stat here, so half of small business owners believe the tax plan will improve the overall economy. If you kind of throw in neutrals, you'll get close to about 75%. But you can contrast that with how many small business owners actually believe they're going to pay less in taxes. That's only about a third of the population out there. So we've got a little bit of a gap between, hey, in general, I believe lower taxes is better for the economy, but I haven't quite figured out this plan enough to know whether or not it's going to be better for me.
Well, before we go any further, is the survey up on your site where people can read it themselves?
Yes, it is. And so we can both, I think it sits under our Spark IQ area. You can Google the Small Business Growth Index by Capital One, and you'll get a link directly to it. And then we can obviously provide a link after the fact to you all as well.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask one more question and turn it over to Dan, because I think Dan will focus on that. But what are some of the other things that your survey found that you think would be of interest to our audience?
There's probably three in my mind here. One, if I go back to the long-term view, we look a lot at hiring, and it's something that I'm always really interested in because in some ways I think that's a pretty powerful indicator of how people are voting with their dollars. And so we saw a big drop-off in plans to hire around the middle of 2015, that we think was really associated with a lot of global economic uncertainty at that point. If you remember, that was back when there was a big sell-off in the Chinese market. There were questions around whether or not Greece was going to default on their loans, and you just saw business owners pull back. We think with a little bit of a memory of the 2008, 2009 global recession, saying, "Geez, let me hold on." That number has crept up quarter over quarter for the last couple of years to where we're now back to about where we were pre that 2015 jar to the market. So around 30% of business owners, I think it's actually specifically 27%, say they plan to hire in the next year. So that's always an interesting stat for us to follow. And then on the more topical side, when we talk about technology and how technology is affecting business owners today, we ask folks just in general, hey, are you investing in technology? And a number that came back that was fairly shocking to me was 80% of business owners said, yes, I'm investing in technology, which in this day and age, I think is like, on one hand, is not that surprising, but 10 years ago, I am positive that was not the case. I was running similar surveys, asking similar questions, and the numbers were more in the 50s. I remember visiting business owners who were still keeping handwritten ledgers, and so it's just really exciting to see, in many ways, the technology revolution catch up with or maybe the other way around. Small business owners really catch up with the technology revolution and spend a lot more time and energy there. That investment number is pretty solid across all of your firmographics and demographics. So regardless of age, size of business, industry, we see that pretty consistently. What's interesting, though, is if you ask people, well, is that investment paying off for your business? Is it making it easier to manage? Is it kind of driving your bottom line? You start to see two splits. One is younger business owners, so millennials tend to be far more positive about their technology investment than older business owners, and that's maybe a bit stereotypical, but it was still kind of surprising to me. And the other one is larger businesses. So if you've got in excess of 20 employees, you tend to view that technology investment as paying off better than if you are a business with either 0 employees or less than 5. So those were just two things that stuck out for me.
Dan, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm curious as to whether or not your survey asked questions about political affiliation or alignment, Democrats versus Republicans versus independents.
No, we don't actually go into politics on our end. As you can imagine, we're in this for a long haul, and so we're going to go through lots of different administrations and lots of different orientations, and so we tend to focus our questions more on what's happening within your business and what are the trends you're seeing than necessarily political events.
Okay, so what are you seeing about the demands or the need for capital to expand? Do they have enough money?
I think that's it. Let me back up for a second. So here's I think the most challenging thing about running broad-based surveys to business owners, and something I believe dearly. I suspect you guys believe dearly as well. Is in many ways, calling the small business community is a convenient thing for folks like us that like to talk about a broad range of business owners. But it's really an incredibly heterogeneous population, and so I think it's very difficult to say, does the small business community at large have the money it needs, or do they have more capital demands? It's a whole lot easier to get into, hey, for businesses that are trying to grow right now, where are they getting their funding from? Or for a particular type of business and a particular type of model, are they seeing their needs met? So I don't actually have an answer for how is the overall community feeling. What we look for a little bit more is through the lens of your overall optimism, the way that you're planning to reinvest savings. What do we see? And I think in general, we see businesses doing pretty well. We see folks continuing to make investments in technology, in hiring, and like I said before, a bit of a return to post-recession norms over the last couple of quarters.
Does your survey address the sources of loans for small business? Are they using fintech lenders? Are they traditional banks or companies like yourself? Do you see where there's any discussion about that, and are there any changes in the attitudes of small business where they go to get capital?
We do not directly. I was spending some time on your site, over the last week preparing for this conversation, and I saw that you have spent, I think, more time than we have on looking for those sources. I can say anecdotally that we see a little bit of a geography effect there, and the more that we talk with folks on the West Coast, the more that we hear stories of some of those fintech lenders being a bigger player, and I'd say it's a bit more muted on the East Coast, but that's not something that we track directly through our survey vehicle.
And what other kinds of things do you track in your survey? Give us a sense of some of the other questions that you're asking to get some kind of information?
Yeah, well, like I said before, we've got two sets. Our baseline set is really around economic outlook, sales forecast, hiring forecast. Where do you think your overall business position will be, right? So kind of just the core stability metrics of that business. And then what we try and do is pulse in over time a few more topical topics, which is a bit repetitive. And so again, this quarter we looked at tax reform, we looked at technology, and we looked at diversity.
So is there a seasonality to your survey? Do you see that different times during the year you get, different kinds of responses? Or is it not the case?
No, I don't think we've seen much seasonality. So we ask twice a year, and we ask somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 small business owners over time. Generally, those things fall, in the February, March timeframe, and then again in the October, November timeframe. So you're always going to see a little bit of, in an election year, you might see, some effect of upcoming sentiment towards that election. You're probably always going to have a little bit of a more forward-looking orientation when you ask people in February, and particularly when you ask people in February about tax reform. You're going to get a more specific answer. But on our core, again, those baseline foundational metrics, we see much more movement based on the economy and where the economy sits than on the month of year that we asked the survey in.
So would it be fair to say that your surveys are showing, as economic activity has picked up in general in the economy measured by GDP, that your survey group is also seeing an expansion of their business, or are they not seeing it?
I think that they are seeing. So I think that's fair to say. The only slight adjustment I might make is their belief in what's going to happen next certainly moves with GDP. I think if you looked at the kind of statement of, hey, I believe things are going to get better, with the same statement of, here's what I think is going to happen with my sales, you again start to see a little bit of separation. And that's something that we've seen over time that I suspect you have seen in business owners you've talked to. I certainly have, which is, I'm an inherent optimist. So I believe things are going to get better in the world, but I'm also really conservative in a lot of the business decisions that I make. So I'm going to hope for the best, but kind of plan for the worst. And we see that anecdote played out in our survey data.
So and how long have you been doing the survey?
8 years.
And is that particular point that you just made, as hope for the best, has that philosophy changed as over the last 8 years, or has it stayed about the same?
It stayed about I would say it stayed about the same when you account for a big jump that you've seen in every survey vehicle that looks at this population around Trump's election and tax reform passing, right? So certainly those two things were momentous occasions for the business community, regardless of how you see that momentum. And they drove really big jumps in optimism at both points. But they did not drive corresponding. Sorry to interrupt you. They did not drive corresponding jumps in expectations around sales, and so that gap persists.
And that's been pretty much consistent for the last 8 years, that there's always that pessimism about sales will grow?
It has, and I would say, again, not to nitpick words, I don't know that it's pessimism so much as it's optimism grows faster. General economic optimism grows far faster than my sales optimism in our survey data.
Interesting. So they're more cautious about their own businesses, but are more optimistic about the overall general economy.
Absolutely. And so if you guys ever have spent any time in morale surveys, this is that general morale versus my morale effect, where it seems like everything's great, but then if you ask me personally, I might have a slightly different question. We see that kind of phenomenon play out here for sure.
So what do you attribute that to? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that there's a part of us that's eternally optimistic and another part of us that's eternally pessimistic.
So I internalize it as really smart decision making by business owners.
Okay.
I think that I think you have to be an optimist to be a business owner. Like every business owner I've met has my utmost respect. I go home at night and can choose to turn off the work that I have because I work at a very large company that I think does great things, but it's a very large company. If I was running a 20-person business, I can never turn it off. And so that means I have to believe that every day is going to get better. I have to believe that I'm making a difference because people's health and welfare rely on me. So I have to kind of be that vision of what's looking forward. At the same time, that means that I have to make really prudent decisions, and I can't be kind of loose and fast with the way I run my business because it's not just me, it's all the people that rely on me, whether it's my direct employees or my supply chain. So I just think it's a dose of healthy decision making where I have a core belief that things are going to get better, but I'm going to wait till I see it before I really put my business and my employees at risk.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'll turn it back to Don. I'm curious about the idea that, if I understood you correctly, that people are looking at what's going on, and as we just said, their optimism about the economy is better than perhaps their optimism for their own company prospects. And you said in a few moments ago, and I think I've got your words right, that respondents to the survey as it relates to the tax changes, they were unsure whether they were going to pay more or less taxes. Was that the right word? Did I hear that word? They were unsure or not sure?
Yeah, let me give you some kind of hard data on that. And so what we saw is that in total, about 12% of people said, hey, I actually don't know whether I'm going to pay more or less. About 40% said, I think I'm going to pay the same. And then you had 36% who thought they'd pay less and 11% who thought they'd pay more. What we've internalized that as we've gone and talked to different business owners is, hey, that the same and don't know category are pretty close. Like when you ask, well, why do you think you're going to pay the same? Most people will say, well, because I haven't really looked into it that much. And so you've got about half of the community saying, I'm going to call it in the middle because I'm not exactly sure. And as you actually start to look at individual business owners who have no employees versus larger companies, with the assumption that larger companies probably have more access to CPAs and tax professionals, that gap gets a little bit wider. You see more people saying, hey, I think I don't know, or I think that I'm going to pay more. And so what we're seeing is we think people have a little bit of a neutral tendency because they don't exactly know what's going to happen in that tax code. And I think that's, a very reasonable reaction because there's a lot of things that aren't written yet, and you really have to spend some time with your CPA, I think, to figure out what it's going to mean for your individual business.
Right, and as a quick follow-up to that, when was this survey taken?
It was in February of 2018. It would have been, right on the heels.
Many of the regulations have yet to be had yet to be released by the IRS. I wonder if you ask that same question in your fall survey, if you'll see different numbers.
Yeah, I think we'll see some movement. We had a breakfast with some business owners in late March, and I would say the sentiment was still pretty much the same. There were still folks who were thinking about it, who were starting to think about maybe a legal entity change, but you just hadn't seen that, of the business owners that we talked to directly, you hadn't seen that many take action yet.
Okay. Don, back to you.
We are talking with Troy Dye, Chief Marketing Officer for Capital One's Small Business Card Division. He's extremely knowledgeable about this survey. But I'm going to go a little bit different and ask you a little bit about Capital One's efforts in the small business. What do you do that makes it so helpful for a small business?
Well, I think we do a couple of things. Don, thanks for asking. Part of it starts, I think, with longevity, right? And so we've been serving this community for 20 years. It's something we take really seriously. And I think what comes with that 20-year commitment is just learning more and more about how individual business owners operate. And so our kind of offering to the community really revolves around three notions. One is the product itself. And so I represent the card division. And we're really focused on serving the full community, right? So we have products for folks who are just starting their business, folks who are in a growth mode and trying to manage cash flow through that growth mode. But really our kind of area of focus is that more established business that's looking to drive more value out of their purchasing process. And so we offer what we believe are industry-leading rewards around that to try and drive a little bit of a transition from viewing your AP files and expense file to maybe one that can provide a bit more margin in your business. Beneath that, what we try to provide is the technology that can make it easy to run your business and work with us. So we work very hard on accounting integration with companies like QuickBooks and Xero. We work very hard on the controls that you can put on your card, both for yourself and for your employees, and the folks within your business who can have access to your account to help do that for you if that's not a place that you want to spend a bunch of time and effort. And then the last thing that we really focus on is service. Because again, I just want to keep coming back to this point that we generally believe there's very little similarity from one business to another. Almost everyone is unique. And so it's really important that we have a high quality service organization that can help each individual business owner with whatever challenge or opportunity that they're facing. And that's the part that I actually get the most excited about. We have some incredible stories. The one that I'll share here is many times Buck Stinson, who is the president of our organization, will have a chance to meet business owners. And some of the best times that we have is when that business owner will say, "Hey, Buck, it's great to meet you. That's really nice. The person I'd actually like to meet, though, is that call center agent in Tampa who I've called 6 or 7 times a year and has really helped me out. If you could put me in touch with them, that'd be a great day for me." And we've had business owners come in through Tampa and ask to have lunch, with the folks that they work with in that servicing organization. That's something that we really pride ourselves on.
That's a great comment, but you opened up a door. Do you see, in your surveys, do you see any industries that are particularly expanding and some that aren't expanding as quickly as one might? Is there any differences in the various sectors that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, in our survey, we just don't have the sample to be able to answer that question convincingly. I'm eagerly awaiting the census results that I know, it's hard to say eager when they're probably a year away, but you've really got to get into a pretty large survey to be able to read that kind of movement. And so we really don't have anything that I would feel has any legitimacy coming out of our survey from an industry growth perspective.
Dan, we have time for one more question. Do you have one for Troy?
Yeah. Yes, I do. So I'm trying to figure out what's the question you want to ask for next year?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's hard for me to say just one. So let me give you a couple that are on my mind. One, okay. I think we've already covered, which is, hey, let's continue to ask this question around tax reform, and not just what's your view of tax reform, but as we get more and more understanding of whether or not that frees up dollars within your business, what are you going to invest it in next? We got an early view of that in this survey where we saw people say that they were going to invest primarily in equipment, kind of a rainy day business savings fund, and raising employee wages, but that's one that I really want to watch over time. I think the other big question that I want to keep zeroing in on is technology. That's something that's near and dear to our heart here at Capital One, and we're very interested in, as companies really start to understand how big of a revolution we're going through as a society, how is that changing their views on their business model, what are they pushing or pulling on, and where are they investing their money from a technology standpoint, because it's both getting easier to adopt new technology as a business owner, but the pace of change is so rapid that it's kind of at the same time really hard to keep up with. So we're going to try and keep our finger on the pulse of those two things.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We've been talking with Troy Dye. He's a marketing director for Capital One's small business group. Troy, it's been great having you. Your information was really worthwhile. A link to his website and the survey will be on recalculating.biz tonight. You can hear this and every other program, and we thank you, Troy, for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You
Take
too.
care. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Recalculating. We hope the information you received on today's episode was helpful to you in starting and growing your business. Please go to our website, recalculating.biz, to contact us, to listen to past shows, and see special offers. Until next time, remember, if you grow, we grow. Join us next week for more helpful ideas to make your business a great success. Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.